The rain in São Paulo doesn't fall like in movies. There's no softly glimmering city under its touch, just fat, invasive drops that hit like coins thrown by a careless giant. I stood in the jutting shadow of the gallery's glass canopy, watching rain splatter across the sidewalk, turning the faded street posters into technicolor blurs. The words from inside still rang in my ears, tangled with the percussion of water on plastic. I'm sorry, Luciana, we love passion, but you're not an artist, not in the way this city can recognize. Maybe you should stick to your lab work. Andreza, the gallery director, gave me a professional smile, the same she gave to every hopeful, every reject. I'd brought an installation, not paintings, not sculpture, a tangled glimmering web of neural sensors, mapped DNA and steel thread. Data rendered as art, patterns flickering across the wires every time someone passed close. I called it resonance, I called it my proof. I must have looked absurd in that moment, loose umbrella in one hand, thick folder under my arm, backpack puddle-soaked at my feet. My heart was thumping behind my breastbone, each beat dull and sore. The gallery's golden light glared around the corner of my shoulder. A group of other artists, all black denim and silver rings, stood together in the entryway, laughing quietly. I caught a phrase, the mad scientist, again, and felt heat in my cheeks. One artist leaned a little too loud in my direction. Next time she'll bring a glowing frog or something. The words meant to hurt, they found their mark. I swallowed, licked the rain from my lips, whispered a thank you to no one and stepped into the downpour. It was always like this, some new way for someone to remind me that I'd never quite fit. I'd grown up here tucked into the apartment blocks of Muka, raised on cafe com late and stories about what jobs real people do. My mother, pragmatic, practical, still didn't understand why I spent nights hunched over a computer, writing code and studying proteins. Why can't you work at the pharmacy like your cousin Maria? Those jobs pay, Luciana. I'd heard that phrase or variations of it from every aunt and uncle at every family fest. Only my younger brother Thiago thought it all sounded cool. At dinner he'd ask about my projects, and I'd tell him about gene editing, about AI's promise, about how the world would change. Most days facing people who doubted and couldn't see was a familiar ache, but tonight sharp hurt curdled under my skin. I hurried down the flooded avenue, the wet folders in my arms feeling heavier with each step. Flickering lights from a passing bus carved silver across the puddles. Home was a one-bedroom just north of Analia Franco, thick with the smell of damp and cheap air freshener. I hung my sodden coat, slumped into a chair at the small kitchen table, and opened my phone to a string of text messages. Me asterisk, lembro de comprar pau, vo asterisk. Estava no jornal uma vaga boa no laboratorio do hospital. Now custa tenta nay, unknown asterisk, thank you for applying. Unfortunately, we are moving forward with other candidates. I exhaled, rubbing rain from my eyes. Even after years of study, after earning my doctorate in computational biology at USB, scholarships scraped together, devouring research late into the morning, I was back at nowhere. The art world wanted vision, but not my asterisk kind. Academia only wanted what was already safe. That night I slept little, listening to dripping gutters, wondering how long it would take before I gave in and applied for something safe, something that would make my family proud. But in the dark, I also imagined what could be built if someone asterisk took this collision of AI and biology seriously, if art and science weren't enemies. Weeks passed, each one stretching with fresh rejections. Research grants gone to established names, art fairs not even acknowledging my submission, yet the worst somehow was home. Sunday dinner at my mother's cramped flat filled with the scent of garlic, rain and defeat. My aunt squeezed my hand and said, all these years and you're still on this silly project. When will you grow up, Luciana? The world isn't built on dreaming. Thiago tried to smile for me, passing more beans, but even his optimism seemed faded. Why can't you just settle Philher? My mother asked gently, eyes soft, or try something people understand. I don't want to settle me, this matters. She shook her head. Sometimes what matters is what puts food on the table. I bit my tongue, refusing to let them see me flinch. I nodded, but the words stuck like a bone. Outside, thunder flickered, and I left the meal early, head down. I moved through the next months feeling like a wraith, packing up resonance asterisk in my small workspace, salvaging what little I could. Each job application felt like betrayal. Then on a night humming with humidity and insects, my inbox pinged. The subject, RE, your proposal generative cellular networks meeting request. A biotech startup in Jardins, small and underfunded but hungry, wanted to see me. Their CTO, Raphael, was a wiry man with restless energy. He didn't blink when I began to explain what I'd built with resonance asterisk, a way of teaching neural networks how to see patterns in living systems, new drugs, new cell therapies, by treating DNA itself as a kind of language, a work of evolving generative art. He listened as I showed him my code, my models, my tangled diagrams. His eyes flickered with something like recognition. When I finished, he asked, "Why do you keep trying to show this as art? You don't need acceptance from them. You're building tools that can heal people." I didn't know how to answer, so I just shrugged. Some wounds are too old to explain. He hired me. He hustled for seed funding. I spent nights building new ways to model cell behavior, using the same sensor web ideas from the gallery, but turned to predict how cancer cells could be disrupted, how the smallest tweaks to code could rewrite health. The work was hard, manic, obsessive, days slid into nights. I worked in glass offices overlooking patterned tile roofs, the city's restless bulk pressing against the windows. The first real result came on a Sunday as rain pounded the city clean again. I stayed in the lab through the weekend, laptop propped beside a battered espresso cup. When the simulation finally stabilized, showing a novel therapeutic candidate, something no human had found, I just stared at it numb. My hands shook as I ran the data again, then called Raphael at home. By Monday we had plans, by Wednesday the news started to spread. A São Paulo daily ran a piece. AI-driven biotech startup discovers promising cancer therapy. My name was buried in the middle, but it was there. The news moved like water, only this time it wasn't a joke. VCs called, government agencies too. By year's end, we had clinical partners in Rio. I was leading a small team, standing in hospital corridors with battered sneakers and a scientist's scrawl on my notepad, suddenly legitimate. I didn't return calls from my family for weeks. It wasn't spite, I wasn't ready. There's a strange kind of injury in rejection, especially from people who know best how to hurt you. I wanted them to see, not just understand, but see asterisk with their own eyes. 3 years later, Sao Paulo wasn't much changed. The floodwaters still laced the gutters. The traffic still bellowed and heaved, but in the conference hall on Faria Lima, it felt like I was breathing completely new air. Our biotech group was hosting its first public showcase. The event staff set up banners that gleamed blue and white. The walls held videos of gene patterns swirling, art rendered from the algorithms that had found their way into medical trials. I stood by the main display, heart tight in my chest, watching people file in, investors, doctors, community reps. I had sent invitations, not only to researchers and city officials, but to my mother, to every aunt and uncle, even Andresa from the gallery. I didn't expect them all to come. I barely expected anyone from home. But at 6:30, just after the caterers rolled out tiny pastries, I saw my mother step inside, holding an umbrella and a bright blue jacket pressed against her body. Thiago hovered beside her, grown taller, hair longer now. Behind them were two aunts, their voices trailing as they peered around the hall. They looked overwhelmed, not just by the scale, the gleaming glass, the quietly humming displays, but by the stern, professional faces, the sense that they didn't quite belong here. I felt a surge of protective affection and anxiety both at once. My mother saw me and called my name, voice soft but ringing over the low chatter. For a moment I was a child again, nervous and raw. "Luciana. You look," she pressed a hand to her mouth, unsure. "You look like you." Thiago smiled, territory mapped in his stride. "Don't let anyone talk over her tonight, yeah," he said to our aunts, half joking, half serious. I led them toward the central exhibit, a twisting web, coldly beautiful, strung above a clear console. The old sensor wires, upgraded, flickered in careful patterns. A video loop explained the journey from code to clinic, from theory to a drug now in phase 2 trials. Headlines scrolled by: Brazilian innovator redefines medicine, AI program predicts tumor response, Novo Esperança. A São Paulo-born breakthrough. People gathered around the exhibit, some wore hospital coats, others lanyards and sharp suits, as I explained how neural networks used biological language to find patterns in cancers our drugs could target, how our first patients were doing. My family listened, eyes wide. I saw skepticism begin to melt away, replaced with stunned awe, pride, a confusing twist of guilt and hope. One of my aunts, always skeptical, interrupted. "So this medicine came from your crazy web? This thing you showed us years ago?" I nodded. "It started as art, I suppose. Then you all told me to get serious, so I did. This is serious now." A crowd had gathered. Andreza, the gallery director, stood behind them, crisp suit perfectly dry, expression unreadable. A man in a suit introduced himself, health minister something, his badge heavy with gold and blue. He clasped my hand, loud enough that all those within earshot turned to us. You should be immensely proud, Dr. Silva. Your work is going to change lives here and far beyond Brazil. I swallowed, searching for the right words, my family listening to every syllable. Obrigado, this is why I did it. I wanted to prove something to my city, to my family, to everyone who thought this work was impossible. For a moment my mother said nothing. Then she reached out, touching the structure, running her fingers over the steel, careful not to disturb the sensors. Her eyes were red, but she smiled quietly with something like surrender. I didn't understand, querida. I see now you weren't the crazy one. Sometimes what matters is not just the food on the table. My aunts began explaining, loudly, proudly, to a group of strangers that I was the scientist, the one with the web, our Luciana. For a moment the weight in my chest lifted. I felt big enough to fill the room. Guided by years of rejection, the stubborn, quiet dignity I clung to became my shield. I met Andreza's eyes. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, the way someone does when they realize they've missed something important. As the press moved in, as flashes lit the edges of my family's faces, I stood tall beside what I had built. After the showcase, I took my family for coffee in a small corner shop, a place that felt more like home. The rain had started again, light soon to be drumming. Thiago pressed his shoulder into mine. You proved them all wrong, he whispered, voice soft and full of wonder. I shook my head, tracing patterns in the foam. I proved myself right, that's all. The hardest thing was the waiting, believing before there was proof. My mother patted my hand. You were always stubborn, I see now that was a good thing. We laughed, watching storm clouds build. As night pressed in, the ache of years seemed, if not gone, at least manageable, folded into the space between us, something that could be lived with. I walked them to the car, umbrella raised. They were talking about seeing my interview on the news, about how to explain to the neighbors what I'd done. It wasn't quite the return I'd dreamed of, no triumphant music, no perfect reconciliation. But as I watched my mother fit her key into the battered hatchback, looking up at me with pride and relief and a kind of shocked love, I knew I had made it home. I stood for a moment in the rain, remembering that first night, the sidewalk, the laughter, the sting of being told not in the way this city can recognize. But now, beneath these same storm clouds, I was recognized. I was enough. I gathered my bag, buttoned my coat, and stepped into the rain, smiling. The city gleamed in softened yellow, and for the first time so did I.